I am 𝗁𝗂𝗃, and this is your spiritual game plan. Change. It's something that happens to all of us. You've invested your time and energy into an important role, sometimes for years, and then suddenly it's time for you to move on. Maybe you've worked hard on a dream, and now your path is taking a new turn, but that dream isn't going with you. Perhaps you've raised your kids and they've moved on, but now your empty nest is filled with parent care. Or maybe you're in the middle of diaper changes and laundry piles. If you find yourself asking questions like, where do I fit in anymore? Am I even relevant? How do I find my purpose now? You are in the right place. This is the show for women in a season of transition. I believe that while your roles in life will change, your purpose is eternal. I'm here to help you understand just how intentionally you were made by a creator with a game plan. Together, we'll discover ways to help you unlock the purpose God's placed in you, develop a game plan for your life's calling, and embrace the intentional masterpiece you were created to be. Hey guys, today I am speaking with my friend Rachel Lewis, and her book Unexpected: Real Talk on Pregnancy Loss comes out today. So congratulations to Rachel and her labor of love in getting this book out today. If you or someone you love has lost a child at any stage of life, from pregnancy to adult, this book is such a wonderful guide through that grief process. Rachel has personal insight from experiencing 5 miscarriages, as well as a unique grief when she had to reunite a foster son with his birth family. All these experiences have equipped her to walk alongside those who need the comfort. She is the founder of an online community that offers support to thousands of bereaved moms called Brave Mamas. She's also a contributor to Standing Still magazine and Pregnancy After Loss support. And today, Rachel and I will be discussing how to have a game plan in place for when those triggers come, and also how to plan ahead for when words that are spoken actually hurt more than they help. I know you're going to be blessed by our time together, and while you're listening, if someone comes to mind who could use Rachel's message, will you share this episode with them? Thank you. Now let's get started with how to get through the unexpected. Real talk on pregnancy and child loss. Hi, Rachel. I am so glad you're joining me from my home state of Washington. How are you today?
Good, Sherry. Thank you so much for being on. I'm so excited to be talking with you today.
Well, today's a big day because you're having, if I understood, you're having a pretty big party tonight, right?
Yes, today is my book launch party. Official book launch is August 10th, but we wanted to have my sister celebrate with us. And so we're having an early official book reading, book signing, fundraising event, and book launch all at the same time.
That is awesome. And then when this podcast actually airs, it will be August 10 and it'll be the launch day. So this is exciting. And I'm so glad I get to talk to you. I met you at a speakers conference, and I was trying to think back. Is it like 3 years ago, maybe?
Oh, goodness. Probably, yes. I think so.
And then we lived within a couple hours of each other, and I never got to see you. But now we're a couple states away, so I'm glad to have this time. So we are talking about your book that is coming out in a couple weeks called Unexpected. And I am so excited that you get to talk about this, but I would love if you would share, before we get started, share a little bit about your family and a little bit about you. And then what has this summer been like in the Lewis home?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So the Lewis home, I'll answer your last question. The Lewis home for the summer, it has been, it's been a lot of like back to back. we took a very impromptu trip to Florida so that my daughter could see her best friend who moved right before quarantine started. And so 3 days after we got back, my sister came. And then, of course, we've been trying to get everything together for the launch event and then the actual book launch on August 10th. So it's flying by much faster, much faster than I wanted to.
I think that's of every summer.
Sure. I know. I'm so not ready for pandemic school to start again. So, and then can you repeat your first question?
I love that you shared a little bit about your family and then kind of what was going on in your household. But how many kids do you have, and exactly where about it is that you guys are living in Washington? Is it the northern? You're north, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, we're right across the water from Seattle. So we are literally just a ferry boat ride away from downtown Seattle, which is really fun. And I currently have 3 kids, and that's always such a weird thing to say. But as a foster family, that number has fluctuated quite a bit. It's definitely my journey to parenthood has not been a straight line of just adding kids. And so currently we have 3 children in our home. We have our oldest who just started middle school, and then our youngest who's late stage elementary, and then our preschool daughter. So we've got just kind of a range of ages there. It's been really fun. So
I love those ages. That is fun. I do remember those. So I have fun asking a couple of questions that aren't on topic. And one was that I found out that you're a Netflix binger. Is that a word, binger? I don't know.
Sure, yes.
I don't know when you have a chance to watch Netflix, but what is it that you have recently binged on?
Okay. I will say my Netflix binging has definitely decreased recently with all of the extra work that's gone into things. I struggle with insomnia some, so that tends to be when I get my binging in, or when I like to listen to TV shows while I'm doing like housework. For some reason, it just makes it a little bit less like a chore. So I have been watching the latest season of Grey's Anatomy recently, which I haven't actually decided if I like this season or not. Actually, like I'm kind of invested in the characters, but it's also like pretty heavy this year. So anyway, so that's sort of my guilty confession, because I know a lot of people don't really like Grey's Anatomy, but that has been my recent. And then I think Virgin River is on my next thing to do.
I'm all caught up on Virgin River.
Oh, you are? Yes, that one is really good. That one's really good.
That's a fun one.
And I love all the baking shows. If I need to de-stress, like the Great British Baking Show is like, that is my comfort. It's like a comfort blanket, right? Just everyone's so calm and nice and happy. So I like them quite a lot.
I'm not a good baker and I don't enjoy it. So I don't know, those kind of shows, I'm like, I could never do that. So
yeah. I just figure it's a way to enjoy baking without all the calories. So
I like that. So one question I like to ask all of my guests is, looking back in your life, how far back can you go to see the very purpose that you are living out today in who you have always been?
That is such a good, deep, and thoughtful question. Okay. How far back? I guess pretty far. Almost preschool age, probably. I can remember being sort of fascinated by pregnancy, and I can remember, even sticking a popple up my shirt when we were playing and pretending to be pregnant. And so I guess that's as far back. As far as purpose goes, I do remember in elementary school, I read a book about an abused child, and I don't know that my parents probably even knew that I was reading kind of that level of material. But it just struck such a chord with me in in that, I think from that moment I read that book, I knew that I was going to adopt. And so that really was the seed that sort of prompted me to adopt and also foster. Like that's something I had actually already planned on being a part of our family story before I even knew that I had any pregnancy struggles whatsoever. And then I also remember in 7th grade, I did a writing project, and it was like a poetry. And I remember just thinking, I really like this. Maybe I'm going to write a book someday.
Wow.
So that's probably as far back as I can remember.
I love that. And I love thinking about it for myself, but having people when they're saying to me, I don't really know what my purpose is. Let's look back at what are you doing today, and look back as far back as you can to see how you've already been doing that. And God planted those seeds when
Right.
he created us, when he wove us together. He knew what we would be doing to further his kingdom, and he made it a part of who we are. And I just love listening to all the stories on that. So thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
your book is out there. I remember when I
Yes.
met you at that speakers conference, I remember you kind of talking and sharing a little bit about it. So I'm so excited to have been able to kind of see this happen. And you did not let the 23 rejections stop you. That is
Yes.
so important to think about. But the timing, the one person that said yes, and the timing that this book is out, it has impacted not only me, it has impacted those who I have shared it with. So I can say this is God's timing. And now I'm excited that I get to be one of the first people to help you introduce it. So thank you. And you describe yourself as the friend others hope to never need. I agree. I hope I never need you in that capacity, because that is so true. And your book is covering pregnancy loss. I like how you share other people's story of infant loss. I have friends who have lost children. They've had stillborn, and I have friends who have lost children in their late 20s, early 30s. And I think this book is so relevant to anyone that has endured such a loss. And I would love if you just give us a little introduction into your story of loss.
Sure. So when I first found out I was pregnant, we were only about 10 months into our marriage. And it was very much a surprise. I had just started my writing career. So I didn't quite feel ready. And we had a big scare. We went in at about 8 weeks, and the doctor said I had a 50-50 chance of miscarrying. And so I went home. They didn't tell me there was anything I could do, but I just needed to do something. So I put myself on bed rest and called into work. And long story short, even though we had such a high scare, I was able to give birth, and it was a very complicated and traumatic birth. But in the end, my daughter was alive. And so I had remembered, back at 8 weeks, everybody already, before I even lost her, people were saying like, well, it just wasn't meant to be, or when it's really God's timing, this will happen, or this is just nature's way of taking care of babies that aren't healthy. And so here I had this beautiful, healthy baby girl, and she was alive. And it was like, I just, this overwhelming sense of, I almost missed this, that I've had for my entire daughter's life, because we actually could have lost her at birth as well. And so I just sort of had this idea, I think, just going into our next pregnancy, that I just could relate. I could just relate what was happening in my body at the time with, like, this is the real person. And if I lose this baby, I have lost a lifetime with a person that I know that I love. And so when we did get pregnant the second time, and I did lose that pregnancy baby I named Olivia to a ruptured ectopic pregnancy, I was sort of thrown into this life that I didn't expect. I kind of, do you know those movies where it's like a time travel movie, right? And we've got this, like, here's your here's the timeline that's supposed to happen, and then here's this inciting event, and it like the big drama is you don't want to like start this other timeline. Well, I kind of felt like that's what happened when I lost my baby, as I was suddenly thrust onto a timeline and onto a life that I didn't want, and that wasn't how things were supposed to play out. And um, it was shocking. I felt alone. I felt forgotten. I felt abandoned. I felt betrayed by God. I felt like misunderstood by my loved ones around me. Uh, Sometimes I say I felt like a stranger in my own body. There was so much of myself I didn't recognize following that loss. And really, ultimately, we experienced a total of 5 pregnancy losses over 5 years of trying. All of those were in the first trimester, and it was a very, very difficult season. We also our first call for for a foster child was going to be an adoptive placement, and right before we were able to bring the baby home from the hospital, we had the diaper bag packed, we had her car seat installed, we had everything ready to go, just waiting on the call to go pick her up. And we got a call that instead said, I'm so sorry, and I don't know how to explain this, but the social worker changed her mind and she picked a different family. And so we had sort of this adoption that we thought was going to happen, uh, not happen. We were able to adopt our middle daughter, which was a beautiful and very, very um, redeeming event and experience and relationship in so many ways. I think for both of us, both of us came to that relationship with trauma, and sort of working through that together, and navigating through that together. I think, just having that safe context for that has been really, really important for both of us. And then we had a foster son that we have now had twice and reunified twice. So we have had him a total of 3.5 years. And we just walked through our most recent reunification of him last summer. And then finally, we have our little rainbow baby, who is now preschool age, which I just cannot believe that she is that old already. So yeah. So when I say it is really complicated when you ask how many kids I have, that's why. I just definitely has been a roller coaster.
Yeah, well, I love getting the history of your story and your family. So thank you on that. So the introduction of your book is an instant, I mean, it instantly grabbed me because it opened your eyes immediately to this loss that you had. And you state that when you lose a child, especially an infant or in pregnancy, people act like you lost the potential of a baby or a near miss
Mhm.
kid. When you said it that way, a near miss kid, an almost kid, I mean, it just sat so heavy on my heart. So what is it that you lost, or a listener that has experienced this, what is it that they've actually lost?
Well, I mean, like I said, they've lost a lifetime with a child, they love. And yeah, I wrote in the book, time opens as many fresh wounds as it closes, or as it heals. And it's the idea of these secondary losses, right? Like maybe a woman's experienced a miscarriage, and maybe she's at a moment where she feels, some sense of just, I've come to terms with this. Like, not that it doesn't hurt her or it's not upsetting or grieving, but she's just sort of in a moment of like, okay, this is part of my story. And then all of a sudden she drives by an elementary school and she sees all the little kindergartners lined up with their cute little backpacks. And she realizes that should have been me. That should have been my baby. Um, and so it's this idea of like, sometimes you don't know what you've lost until you're in the moment, and then you realize, or you're at a holiday event and your child is not included. There's not a stocking hung for them over the fire. There's not presents for them under the tree. Or you're at the Thanksgiving table and you recognize there's an empty chair where there should be. where there should be your baby. And so you just, it's like you walk around with this that alternate reality of what you thought life would look like, right? And then you, and then there's moments where it just becomes so clear, what's lost. And the converse of that is that there's so many times in which you say, like, I don't know what I lost. Like which is its own grief. I don't know what my child would have looked like. I don't know the color of her eyes. I don't know if she would have called my mother like grandma or mama or Mimi, or, like, I don't know if she would have been good at sports or music, or I don't know what her babies would have looked like. Right. So there's all this ambiguous loss that's also wrapped up in the loss of a child. And I do think, we sort of treat pregnancy with like on the one hand, we look at a pregnant woman and if she is fully and healthfully, pregnant, we look at her and we affirm her love for her baby. We talk about this child already existing, and we talk about it as a baby, and we, just really affirm that relationship. And then the moment that baby is gone, or the baby dies and the pregnancy has ended, we sort of shift gears, I think, partially just to protect ourselves, just to say like, oh, well, you lost the potential for a baby, or the baby wasn't fully developed yet, or you were only so many weeks. Like we almost sort of discount it a little bit. And I think that's to protect our own psyche from recognizing the magnitude of the loss. But at the same time, that is so I don't want to say it's not disingenuous, but it just it discounts her experience. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I love hearing that from you, having gone through the loss, and me having to admit some of those thoughts did enter my mind when some of my friends did lose either a pregnancy, an infant, where you're thinking, okay, well, you want to move on, you want to make it better, you want, and you just don't think what they're sitting there losing. So when I read that, I just thought, oh wow, that just makes it so real, and so gives me such a great insight into what my friends and loved ones have gone through. Your book, I love that it's written in 4 parts. You break us down the loss, the lament, the love, and the legacy. And after each section, I loved your journal prompts. I really did. They asked such great, or they gave you such a great way to think about it. And even if the listener has not lost a child themselves, I would guess that many of us have a friend or a family who has lost a child, because and those of us that haven't lost a child have faced a loss. And what I loved about these journal prompts is they kind of gave me permission to say, yeah, I hate it when such and such happens, or this makes me mad, or, gave to really put that down into words and to see it on paper. And the journal prompts are so profound. And I would love if you would just give us a glimpse into each one of those 4 sections.
Yeah. So what's sort of interesting about the sections and sort of how they came about, I went to my Facebook page and I said, if I were going to write, or if I were to speak for a weekend on this topic, what would you hope that I would cover on pregnancy loss? And so what I did is I got just so many responses. And so I literally went down with printed them out, literally cut them out, set them all over my living room floor, and then said, okay, what are some of the common themes that are running through these topics that people have come up with? And so then that is, I started forming them, and that's how the chapters came. And then I looked now at each chapter. I put a chapter title on, wrote it on, literally got my little kid's glue stick out, started putting down the pieces, each one of those topics. So then I had my chapters here, literally cut and pasted. And then I said, okay, like what are the themes? like how do each of these make sense and correlate with each other. And so love, loss, lament, and legacy, that's that those themes sort of came from that. And so loss, that first section, that really is meant to meet a grieving parent right where they at in the first days or weeks following a loss. And so it's a little bit less research heavy, a little bit more principle based, a little bit shorter of a chapter, and it is meant to be very, very affirming, just to sort of give the reader permission to feel everything that they need to feel, to think the things that they need to think, to say the things they need to say, in light of this loss. And it also just addresses the very, a couple of the very real things, as such as taking care of your body, taking care of your heart, taking care of your mind. So that is the first section. And then lament, that is where we really get into the nitty gritty of grief. What what does grief look like? Um, how is this loss really going to affect your body? Not just the pregnancy loss, but the grief as well. How is this really going to affect your mind, and what are you sort of at potential risk for, and how do you sort of navigate between what is postpartum depression and what is grief? We talk a lot about the soul, like how do you embrace that wrestling with God, and saying like, yes, I am lamenting, and to accept that. So that's really, I really hone down on what grief is, and then specific to pregnancy loss. Love is, how do I experience this loss within the context of community? How do I reach out to other people, and how do I allow other people to reach out to me? How do I ensure that I have the support that I need and communicate that to other people? How do I walk my loved ones? So I'm grieving, how do I walk my child through the loss of her, baby sister she didn't get to meet? How do I walk my rainbow baby through, through this story of like, Olivia is a part of our lives. Like as she has questions, how do I sort of navigate that? How do I interact with my spouse and my significant other? So that's really like grieving in the context of community. And then legacy is, okay, so now what? So now we have this loss. We're on this timeline that we never wanted to be on. We can't go back. What does this look like for us moving forward? And I want to clarify, moving forward, meaning moving forward with my baby, with this experience, not moving on away from my baby or away from my experience. So how do I take this experience and integrate it into our lives? And how do I find some hope? How do I find some purpose while also still affirming and not judging my grief? And how do I grieve for the long term? What could that look like? And how do I, if I want to adopt, or if I have loss after loss, or if I have infertility after loss, or if I go on to have a pregnancy after loss, what kinds of things am I, could I expect, and sort of should I prepare for? So, and then last, how do I create a legacy for my baby if I want to? So that is, that's sort of the rough draft, I guess, or like the rough overline of what a reader would expect when they came to my book.
Yeah, it's really good. I love the leaving of a legacy. I want to ask a couple questions about later on down the road here, but you have a chapter titled Minding Your Mind. And I love this for two reasons. One, it helps the reader think about having a game plan to be aware of their mental health, but it also addresses men and their mental health, and having a plan for, when there are triggers or hurtful ignorant things that can be said, unexpected emotions that come out. I mean, minding your mind and having a strategy for how to navigate these is so important. I want to address the men, but first, what are some of the things that you can help others do as far as minding their mind?
So there it was really interesting. So reading a lot about trauma and the way that trauma rewires the brain, because a lot of pregnancy losses are also considered traumatic losses, and so you're dealing with both grief and you're dealing with trauma, right? So um, just understanding, I think for the reader to come and one understand why their mind is thinking the way that it is. Why is it operating the way that it is? Just that validation of saying, okay, I'm not crazy. I have not lost myself. There is a biological reason why suddenly, this area of my life is more of a struggle, or why I can't make really simple decisions like what I want to wear today or what I want for lunch. Like, why is that overwhelming? Okay, well, here's the biological reason why. And so I think first coming to that and understanding, just knowing like you're not crazy, there's a reason. And that can be so validating to just simply understand so that you can accept it and not judge it. Because if we're so busy judging it, we're not actually moving on to any kind of solution or any kind of coping mechanisms, right? We're just sitting there angry or frustrated at what we're experiencing in our mind. And so that's not helping us ultimately. And so just saying, okay, it is what it is. Now what? Now what can we do? And so we talk a lot about in the book about grounding exercises and how that can help in the moment. We talk a little bit about simplifying your life and pre-making decisions, such as when you're talking about grief triggers and just sort of having that game plan. So such as like, you may go to the grocery store and someone may think you're pregnant. You may still look like you're pregnant. So how are you going to navigate that answer? How are you going to navigate when you go to a social event and somebody says, how many kids do you have? Right? We ask that question all the time. So the book really talks a little bit about some of those common scenarios and then pre-deciding how you're going to answer, and just sort of having a game plan going into it takes that shock factor away. It takes that, that blank, like look on your face, or where you're just kind of like, I don't know what to do. It just takes that away. And you can just automatically go into a default, like, this is what I feel comfortable answering. And so navigating grief triggers, and then also physiologically how to help your body calm down once you have been triggered. So what are some ways that you can try to get out of that trauma response, and work around that, more quickly? It eventually you will figure it out whether you have a game plan or not. But for some of us, those kinds of triggering events might happen at work, or it may happen, at a time where you don't have hours to sort of sort through how you feel and sort of get back to where you can function a little bit better. And so, like, I know that you're a big advocate for game plans. And so, so I think knowing sort of how to navigate those kinds of events and when it comes up can be very relieving for a grieving parent.
Yeah. It's not if it happens, it's when it happens,
Yes.
and understanding that it happens. And even maybe thinking through some of the scenarios before they happen. I might be wrong, but does it give you some kind of a compassion for when it does happen? You're not as quick to react to the trigger, or maybe the hurtful, ignorant comment, if okay, this is what I'm going to be told at some point.
Right. Yes, I do. I do think so, because when you know that it's going to happen, like you said, it's not quite as shocking. What may be shocking is hearing maybe who says it. Like maybe you might expect, some, busybody at church to like come say something mean, but maybe you're not expecting your own grandmother to say something that's going to trigger you. And so to some extent, I think it can help soften the blow to know to expect it. I think what it can do as well is it can give you a measure of control. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we know about trauma is it's that lack of control that perpetuates that traumatic response. And so by by pre-deciding, by coming up with this game plan, you're inserting your will and your measure of control into the situation. And so that can also help alleviate some of those feelings of distress.
I really like that. That helps even me in, in my life come up with some ways to handle things when it happens. So like I mentioned a little
Mhm.
bit earlier, I think it is so sad that men have less support just all around. Basically, men have less to little to none support,
Mhm.
no support. You mentioned that their grief is not validated in the same way as women's, and that is
Mhm.
so true. And I'm so happy that you have addressed this. So, what are some ways that we can support the father, the grandfather, the uncles, the brothers, the men that lost their first baseball game or their first,
Mhm. Mhm.
their kids' football games, or they've lost all the, dad and son moments and papa moments, those times. And what can we do to help those men?
Such a good question. I'm so glad that you bring that up. I think one of the first things that all of us can do is to recognize that pregnancy loss is not a woman's issue; it is a human issue, and and that means it. Yes, it happens to a woman's body and through a woman's body, um, but it also is the loss of a child, for the dad, and in some capacities it can make it a little more challenging or add some more complexity into the loss and into the grief because it's such an ambiguous loss, or it can feel like an ambiguous loss. And so uh, ambiguous losses are just can be harder to grieve, and it's also considered a disenfranchised loss, which means society doesn't recognize that it's a loss. And so think about it, like it would be kind of so you and I, when we woke up this morning, chances are we looked in the mirror at some point today to get ready for our podcast, and we weren't shocked by what we saw, right? Because the mirror reflected our reality back to us. And so we knew what to expect. We were projecting an image, and the image was reflected back to us. Uh, for a man who's going through pregnancy loss, he knows his reality. He knows that he's lost a child, and he's projecting that reality to the best that he can to the world. And the world is saying, no, it is not your loss. It is a woman's loss. And so the image coming reflecting back to him is not the one he's projecting. And so that is a just to be so invalidated all the time at every moment, is such a hard thing. So men tend to already, and I'm gonna have to say 10 because we could do lots of like putting grief in boxes just by gender, and I don't want to do that. But for men, it can be that disenfranchised loss, that unrecognized, that he's portraying this loss, and society is saying, no, we're not going to support you, we're not going to have anything to do with that. We just want to focus here on your wife. One of the ways that we grief supporters tend to do that is we may start treating the partner in the situation as the point person. So when I say a point person, I mean the person coordinating that couple's care. The person that's in direct relationship, maybe they're updating the GoFundMe, maybe they're posting on social media. We tend to go to the guy in the situation, or the partner, and we say, how is your wife doing? What does your wife need from me? How can I help you? And we forget that his brain is also stuck in this trauma response, right? And so just recognizing it's our job as supporters to go to the point person and say, how can I support Mary and Joe? How are Mary and Joe doing? Um, Not, hey, Joe, how's Mary? That's a really just practical way. And then also recognizing and affirming to him, I see you. I see your loss. I see that this affects you. I give you permission to be real with me. I want to affirm that, and then to recognize, there's these two different kinds of grief styles I talk about in my book, and two different kinds of needs that people meet in grief, and women tend, in generality, tend to sort of swing in one direction a little bit on the continuum, and men tend to go in the other direction. And I think as society, what we need to embrace is that both styles are equally valid. So maybe we believe that grief looks like crying, and it feels, and it looks like labeling emotions, and it looks like sitting around a circle and saying, I'm so sad. Um, and then there is this instrumental style. This is, I don't need to necessarily feel something. I need to think about what this loss means to me. I need to do something with all this emotion in my body. I need to go for a hike. I need to saw, or I need to, like, it doesn't have to be a manly thing per se, but just physically embrace the grief and like get it out. One of the people I quote in my book says it's like converting your tears into sweat. Um, and so for all of us as society to start recognizing grief can look a lot of ways. And it's important to take someone at their word when they say, like, this is what I need in grief, rather than challenging it. To say, okay, I affirm that, and I will, do what I can to help you meet that need in your grief.
I love how you say turn your tears into sweat. And I had a replay of my daughter suffered a traumatic injury when she was 5. And all of a sudden, all I could do was iron. I started ironing everything. I started ironing sheets and pillowcases. I had this ironing. And I got mad when people told me, you just need to stop doing that and just relax and just, they didn't want me to work. They wanted me to just sit. And I don't sit in grief. I have to process it that way. And so I didn't like them telling me to stop it. And, and I love that you recognize that. And I hope if someone's listening, they can recognize that in someone else or even in themselves, and maybe, iron along with the person or something.
Exactly. Join them in it, and for goodness sake, don't judge it.
Yeah, exactly. I like how you said that. So in your book, you acknowledge that you are a Christian, you have faith in your walk, but you also acknowledge a reader that might not have the same faith, and you acknowledge your struggle with God and your struggle with faith, but you extend so much grace to people that might not have the same faith or any faith. So why does faith in the light of loss not always look like faith, and why is that okay?
Oh, such a good question. I mean, a very simplistic answer of why does faith not always look like faith? It's very simplistic, is because I think we paint the picture of faith like it's just so incomplete, the way that we typically say faith should look like. Um, very very concrete example, I guess. People sometimes would say to me, like, well, you just have to trust God, in this loss, or trust his timing, or you just have to let go and let God, right? It's like we have this idea that the most, like, maybe the best way that we can show God our faith is to say the words that we think he wants to hear. But the issue with that is God already knows what we're thinking. He already knows what we're feeling. And so saying something that we're not actually believing is lying to God, right? And it's doing so under this context that our relationship with God is somehow threatened. Like when we lie to people, usually the reason for the lie is to repair that relationship. We don't want to disappoint that person. And so, but the context of that is that this relationship is not as safe for me to actually embrace who I am and what I feel and what I'm going through. it's this concept that we maybe need to protect God from ourselves, from our messy, yucky, imperfect, struggling selves. And so I would say it's just so much more of a greater act of faith in a relationship. Like, let's say you and I were having a difficulty. It would show more the strength of our relationship if I said, Sherry, you did this thing and it really hurt my feelings, and I'm going to need to sit with this for a while. And, we'll circle back. But like, if I were to be very direct with you, that would be a greater act of my faith in our relationship than for me to have said, Sherry, everything is just perfectly fine. And especially if I knew not everything was perfectly fine, especially if I was seething inside and I knew that I was going to, get off the phone with you and I was going to go call my friend and be like, can you believe what Sherry did? Right. Yeah. So there's this, we know this in relationship, that it is a greater act of faith in that relationship to be honest and to be transparent and to work through our issues. But when it comes to God, we forget, we think we have to perform for him, and we don't. That's not what a relationship is. A relationship is not a performance. It's saying, hey, this is a safe place. This is a place where I can be me and I can be real and I can let you in to that. And so in my opinion, I just think it's a greater act of faith to say, God, I feel like you betrayed me. I am so angry with you right now. I do not understand. You had the power to save my baby and you didn't. And I am pissed off at that. And I might be pissed off for the next 5 years. That is a greater act of saying, like, I actually trust you in some capacity to let you into my feelings and to let you see the me that I really am, not the me that I think you want me to be. So I think that that's really why it's important. And I share this example of Job in my book. I go through it a little bit more in detail than I'll go through it here with you. But when we Christians tend to look at the book of Job, we see it as the example of basically the perfect sufferer. And we stop at chapter 2. We think we know why the losses happened to Job. We understand that he did not accuse God of wrongdoing. We feel like he's passed his test, and we're like, we're good. We don't need any more. Like, why are there so many chapters in the book of Job? Why are there 42 chapters? We're at 40, we're good. And the reality is, though, that God has created all of this space. I mean, when you think about how big a Bible is, and if that's supposed to be all of God's word for all of time, if you think about just how much real estate that is to have that many chapters just dedicated to wrestling, that should tell us something about God's value and us wrestling with him and wrestling with what does our faith look like in light of suffering, in light of questioning, in light of pain, and in light of our humanity. And ultimately Job does accuse God of wrongdoing. And was God super, 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 comforting and sort of like coming at him maternally? No, not necessarily. That's not, at least how, when I read the text, that's sort of not really the tone that I get from him. But ultimately, what God says is, he says, let me show you more of who I am. Right? So Job wrestled. He was being honest. He was being transparent. And he emerged from that with a greater understanding of who God was. And God reserves, in the end, he reserves his harshest criticism for those who were so busy trying to give the answers, they never had time for the questions. So I just think that, God himself has given us permission to wrestle and to say, this is real. And I think embracing the fact that these losses are not tests of our faith. God is not a cruel God who torments us and then just says, well, now show me how much you love me. But he is a God who is willing to hold space for us and hold space for our humanity.
I really like that picture. And I like that concept of Job, because, you know, when you grow up in a faith home and you hear the story of Job and you read, you're right, you know, you hear it, but you don't hear the last part, like you said. And it was just so profound to hear that,
Mhm.
and to understand that um, God God is in pain with you. He's in pain
Mhm.
with the loss that you lost. He's in pain with this world in general, and
Mhm.
um and he's okay that you're in pain and angry about it. We should be angry about this world and what it holds, and I love that analogy of a good friendship,
Mhm.
you know, and just being able to
Absolutely.
say, this is not, I don't like this is not good, it's
Mhm.
not right. And it's true.
Mhm.
I've mentioned earlier that I
Mhm.
have many friends that have lost children, and I feel helpless. I know there's nothing I can do. And I think that's one
Mhm.
of the reasons we say things that are ignorant and hurtful, or maybe,
Mhm.
you know, men are fixers, solvers, and they can't solve it.
Mhm.
So they don't know how to go to their friends, their male friends, and do anything to solve it. It's such a helpless feeling. And so I know that, you
Mhm.
know, I don't know what to say. And sometimes not saying anything is bad, but then I'm scared. I'm
Mhm.
scared to say something that could seem shallow, or from a place of not truly knowing what they're feeling. And you have a whole chapter on these hurtful words that are said. So, why do words that are said with really good intention to comfort actually offer pain? And how can we best comfort and support someone that we love who has lost a child?
Um, that such I keep telling you, you keep asking questions like, oh, that's a good question. Um, let me start by saying I wrote an entire chapter on this that is a bonus chapter. It is not in the book. It is a pre-order bonus, which means if you pre-order the
Okay.
book by August 10th. So for those of you who are watching, like maybe I'll keep it up for a couple of extra days. But if you go to my website, unexpectingbook.com, right on the landing page, there's a form. You can put in your information there. And what you'll get is a chapter called How to Help a Loved One Through Baby Loss.
Mm,
And the reason I wrote that chapter and I felt like it was just so important to have is because that is the most common question that I get as someone in the baby loss community is my loved one just had this. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. Can you please help me? And I think our intentions are so good, right? We have both this desire to say something helpful and comforting, and we also have this fear and this pressure to make sure we don't say something wrong, and that's a lot of pressure for those of us who are comforting somebody else to put ourselves under, to think I need to come up with something wise and something good and something hopeful and something strong, and I also need to make sure I don't hurt them in the process, and that can be paralyzing. And so my good news is all of that pressure, you can just set it aside. um, the good news is none of your loved ones are looking to you for an answer on their loss.
mm,
They are not looking to you for hope. They are not looking to you for a way for them to move forward.
mm,
Um, in a sense, they want you to be their mirror, and that can be really hard in the sense that um, that requires us to just sit and be still and be present and allow them to project their reality without judging it. Um, but in a sense too, it's so simple. It is doable, right? Um, that we can ask the question, "How are you doing?" Or "I'm here and I would love to hear more about your baby. If you ever want to
mm,
share with me about your baby, I would just be so honored to hear."
mm,
Or um, I can only imagine what you must have physically gone through. Um, I probably will never be able to fully know, but if you ever want to talk through your birth experience with me, I just would be so honored to just listen,
mm,
and hear what that was like for you. So so being able to just let that person be seen. I often like to go to, I'm not sure if you have you heard of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, I heard about that book.
It's a
Yes.
very, yes. It's a very good and heady book. But there is this one quote in there that I just loved, and he talks about the definition of social support. And he said the reason that social support is so important, it is like the number one thing that can make the difference between whether an event is more traumatic, increases that trauma, or if it helps heal the trauma that already happened. And statistically speaking, social support is that one thing. And then he says, so what is social support? It's that feeling of reciprocity. um it's allowing that person to be heard, to be seen, to be held in the safety of someone else's mind, and to
Mm.
just create that visceral feeling of safety. And so in my chapter, I talk through each one of those things, and just to give principles, because I feel like I could give a really long list of make sure you do this or make sure you don't do that. But that's just going to perpetuate that paralysis, right? Of that
Mhm.
overwhelm of like, I have to get this right. So instead, I just wanted to focus on principles. Like, here's some ways that you can make sure your loved one feels seen, they feel heard, their their physical needs are taken care of, that you've given their body that physiological feeling of safety, that visceral feeling, and you're allowing them to feel held in your mind.
Mm.
And just and that social support is the most important thing. And I share that in the chapter. Like, my words I hope are helpful, and I hope that they are healing, but until they are wrapped up in a human touch, they are limited, right?
Mm.
So I need for loved ones, if you read my book, if you read my book, um take my words and wrap them in your human touch, right? And in that relationship that only you have, that I could never touch. Just know how important your social support is. And then I would say no to that. I think sometimes the reason our words are hurting when we intend for them to be comforting is we feel so helpless when we're trying to help someone through baby loss, because the situation itself is unfixable. Because we can't bring back that baby, we can't rewind time, and we feel so powerless to fix the situation. But we feel some power in the sense, maybe I could fix their grief, maybe I could fix that person. And so I think we unintentionally sort of do that. We just try to say, well, maybe if you look at it like this, insert blank blank blank, or maybe if you stop ironing and just rest. Or maybe if you stop working so much, I think that you are you're dealing unhealthfully. We try to fix the person because we think we know what they need. But instead, it's allowing them to heal. I kind of say it's like, we have a really bad scrape. um it's like you clean it out, you put Neosporin on, you put a band-aid. um when you do that to somebody else, um you're not healing them,
Mhm.
you're creating an environment in which healing is possible. So when we come to someone else's grief and their wound is raw, our job is not to heal their grief. Our job is simply to create an environment in which they can heal. And
Mm.
so I think just taking that approach, and sort of embracing that principle can be really, really helpful.
That is helpful. Thank you for that. So I love the concept of a legacy, and I have to admit I had never really thought of that and how powerful it is. So as we close, I would love if you would share with the listener who has lost a precious child
Mhm.
why a legacy matters, and what have you done as a legacy, not only to Olivia, but I don't know, with your other children that were lost and reunified with family. How do you go about creating a legacy for them?
Well, when I talk about a lot about legacy, I think it's really, really important to, just come out of the bat and say a legacy is not why your baby died. Even if you create the most beautiful, meaningful thing out from this loss, it doesn't justify your loss. It doesn't make your loss okay. And it doesn't mean that's why your baby had to die so you could do XYZ. Olivia's whole purpose in life was not so I could write this book. This doesn't make the loss of her or the loss of my other 4 babies okay. So that's what a legacy is not. What a legacy is simply one of many ways to answer the question, what now? I use this analogy of Mount St. Helens in that chapter to talk a little bit about the eruption of grief in our life and the devastation that it leaves. And like Mount St. Helens, when all the dust settled, scientists were asking each other, what now? What comes next? What do we do? And as you know, if you look at Mount St. Helens now, it's not the same mountain it was right after the eruption. There's been regrowth. There's been beauty that has come from the ashes, and in part because scientists ask that question, what now? So there is beauty that can incorporate our losses as we move forward with our loss in our lives. And I think in some part that can be a gift our babies give us. Maybe I have a whole new appreciation for life, for the fragility of life. Maybe I have a whole new appreciation for health. Maybe I have, or maybe I just take moments in my day and just, notice beauty around me. Like there's things that our losses can, and our experiences of losses can give us, gifts if we let it. And I think there's also this other component where we give our babies a legacy. We try to create some purpose from our pain, and I think it's less of a you have to do this as much as it is, this is one way to cope. This could help bring some healing to you. I think, initially I joined the support group that I was working in, the support group that I went to initially after my loss that helped me heal sort of initially. I eventually became an assistant to the chapter director and helped run the support groups with her and facilitate discussions around loss. And the reason was because I needed to create some meaning. I also blogged about my losses because one of the ways that I felt most comforted to read the stories of other people that had gone before me, to know that they survived and so that I could too. So what I chose to do is to write on my blog very candidly about what I was going through my losses. And that was one of the ways that I sort of created this legacy for my babies, is because as I was working through my own grief, I was also helping some other women walk through hers. And I think legacies can look all kinds of ways. They don't directly have to relate to pregnancy loss or baby loss or even death or grief. It can look a million different ways. But those legacies that we leave, it's the regrowth. It's taking what is completely devastated and saying, I still want to see beauty here. I don't want my life to remain just this, exactly how I was right after the eruption. And I think it's really important too that there's no timeline associated with this. If you wanted to create a legacy for your baby, you could do it, the moment of your loss, or you could wait until you're 99 years old and say, this happened a long time ago, and this is something I want to do um, because of my experience here. And both of those responses are perfectly okay. And then even to say, I don't know that that's for me, that's okay too. So again, this is just one way forward. It's not the only way forward.
All of that is so powerful. And I can't thank you enough for spending time out of your busy day, your busy yet fun day to share with me, because it has just been such a blessing to read and even apply into losses that I've had, even if it hasn't been a child loss, but other areas of loss that I've experienced, and I'm sure the listener has experienced. And then again with friends that have gone through this. And I'm just so thankful that you spent time with me. I'm honored to be able to call you friend, and I look forward to getting this book out there. And I just want to thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Sherry, for having me. It's been such an honor.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
It is my prayer that this time with Rachel has brought some comfort and some healing if you have lost a child, or if someone that you have loved has lost a child. Maybe this helps you with some ideas on how you can comfort them. There were so many topics that Rachel and I did not have time to cover in this episode, so I hope that you'll go online, buy your own copy and even an extra one to give to someone who needs to know that they are not alone. Links to connect with Rachel, her online community, and to buy this book are in the show notes. Have you subscribed to this podcast? If not, please do so. That way you do not miss any up-and-coming episodes, and I value your feedback. When you leave a rating and a review, it helps to get the word out about the podcast. It also lets me know how I can continue to serve you. During today's episode, did a friend come to mind who you know would be blessed? If so, I would love it if you'd share a link with them. Listeners like you sharing links with others is how this podcast can reach more people. I'd love to hear from you. Ways to connect with me are in the show notes or simply at 𝗧𝗵𝗁.com. Thanks again for listening to Your Spiritual Game Plan, the podcast that shares God's plan and your purpose in it.